So what are we doing as artists? What are we doing with that? And I thought about this a lot in my early life, like, teens and 20s, and I was never comfortable with the there's sort of a termination point with making things, making art. You make a painting and you hang it on a wall, and people look at it, and that's sort of cool. It'll stimulate them, and they may take ideas from there, and good thing. You make a piece of music and people listen to it, and maybe that'll stimulate them, and they'll take that and they'll go somewhere with it, But there's also sort of there's a terminal point in there, and I remember thinking at the time is like, it's more fun in a way it's cooler in a way to be a playwright than be an author, like in the, write the poem, write the novel, whatever. Because that kind of insists that there are later interactions in it. This thing hasn't stopped at this point, even if a thing stops, it can keep going in other ways, but and someone can take that novel and turn it into a play or turn it into a movie or whatever and get more interactions from it, and it may stimulate someone to do another one, like you see a painting and you go, oh, that makes me want to paint, and so then you paint something, like, I'm not trying to say that the terminal aspect of this is necessarily bad or anything. It just is, and for me, I felt like kind of disappointed in that in a way. It was fun to go out and play and get people to dance because that had this interaction. You would do something, make something, noise in this case, and it would stimulate other people to do something, and in a philosophical and political sense, I like that something makes something else happen, that things are part of, chains and vortexes and all that kind of stuff. I like that better than you make a thing and there it sits and it has, the other way is that you make an object, a recording, a book, a painting, sculpture, whatever, and you make this thing and then it has value. And that's very much, the model in capitalism, in, a society based on trade. But, I like much better the idea of things that are just part of the stream of existence, whatever you want to call it. And so, and so I looked for ways that you could do things that had continuity after oneself in it, rather than things where continuity terminated with producing this work. And there was a time I got really angry when people called me a sculptor, or, I'm not an artist. Artists make things that they sell to people, and that was a little bit immature, that was like, and, I kind of think that was stupid now, but I think the point's kind of well taken a little bit too, is that I think it would be good if more of us provided things for people to do things with. Ouch. Then we made things that just stopped. And part of the negative power of living in, capitalism, and living in, and capitalism automatically, what it does is it generates oligarchies. That's how it works. That's the only thing it can do. There is no basic fairness or equality anywhere in the origins of the system. It's, they may happen sometimes, but it's not what it's meant to do. Like the whole dynamic driver of this is that you can separate yourself from others and you can insulate yourself from the concerns. Like if I have enough money, I never have to worry about not having enough to eat. Or if I have enough money, like I never, I'm insulated, I'm safe, And to me, that's a paranoid way of going about life in the first place. And really just, I don't know, it's unappealing to me because it's greedy and selfish and, all that, not into it. Anyhow, if we who aren't the oligarchs and aren't, the elites of this system, if we participate in ways that do the same thing as that, we're not really helping one another out all that much. And if we make things that allow other people to make things, then we're kind of empowering ourselves rather than ourselves generally rather than ourselves individually. Then we're sort of doing something like that. And I think this is really important. Those who've read Gramsci and thought about cultural hegemony and like that will understand that probably the deepest way we're oppressed and why all our revolutions continue to fail, and they do, is because we end up basically reaffirming the same sort of hierarchic and elite-based, oligarchic structures as that are oppressing us. And even if we make a new structure that's supposed to be fair, that says all the right things, we end up with Mao and we end up with Stalin and we end up with, Hitler. All of those talked about empowering people, and they all end up concentrating power and oppressing people, And what Gramsci was on about was we need to create culture that isn't that one, And so me at a young age thinking about all this stuff and it made me very uncomfortable being an artist, I didn't really want to be in that position in society. I felt a lot more like, no, I'm just a regular person, who does things. I'm not trying to make these objects that generate value so much, and we're put in that conundrum, I can well sympathize with people who feel the need to do that. Yeah, you gotta pay the bills, you gotta, take care of yourself, you need to have a life, And so naturally you'll do that. Like, I want to do what I want to do, right? I don't want to like have to do something else all the time, and then do this on the other side. That devalues what you do, doesn't it? I was never like, people like relatives and stuff like that, when I wanted to be a musician early in life, would go, well, Charles Ives, he was awesome, and like, he made millions of dollars, like, working. I don't really know what he did. I'm not that big a fan, but he was like a big deal insurance dude, and so he didn't care if his music like made any money and stuff like that. He just did stuff because he wanted, and I kind of dig that in a way. I think he did some cool things, but in a way he just provides an excuse to devalue what creative people do, in a way. Said, well, you do that on your weekends, and go put in 40 hours doing whatever insurance people do, amortization, or, whatever, Anyhow, I think if we want to succeed in any of our revolutions and like that, we have to build a base culture that has some autonomy from, the system of capital, that isn't about generating monetary value, that isn't about that sort of, what makes the monetary value about that is that it terminates, is like, here's the object, and that generates, people who think about scarcity will get with that, is like, okay, there's this one object, I've made this one thing, and like, so if you want it, you have to buy it, and the more I can deprive you of it, the more its value will be, so that if you're a dead painter, your prices will go through the roof because there won't be any more of them. It's scarcity. And I think like scarcity kind of made sense as a driver of society 100 and 200 years ago and stuff like that, because people hadn't made a lot of stuff, Now, there isn't scarcity. There's enough food to feed everybody. There's, not that everybody gets fed. And what blocks this is that the essential thought of how capitalism works is by using scarcities as an advantage to improve one's own condition. And it essentially makes us competitive with one another, and it essentially makes that termination, which generates the scarcity around it, it makes that desirable. And I would like to see those of us who work in culture, whether we get paid for it or not, think much more about how does this enable? How does this, can we make this spread in some way? How can we remove scarcity from this? How can we remove that isolation that makes the scarcity, that generates the value around things? And so how can we be participants with the people, This is something I hate about, political elitists, and there's just as, they're almost worse on the left than they are on the right. They want to be like vanguards, and they talk about the people, but nobody shows up for their things, they're little cliques of theorists and stuff like that. And yeah, that bugs me. Like, if you're going to be of and for and by the people, like, maybe have some people involved, it doesn't count if you're just like going to theorize and like that. Anyhow, this basic cultural assumption of artists making discrete objects, we should wash that one out, you know. Anything you make will have that in it because it just will, you know. But that doesn't need to define what we do, you know. One of the cool things about graffiti back in the day, before it became, you know, a career path for self-promoters, was that things would add to things, and you would get walls. They were just beautiful amalgamations of different things. Something would even get torn off so an underlayer would show through, and somebody would add on top of that and harmonize, and you would get, you know, you get these sort of fields of communal creation and communal thought, and that is of the people, you know, voluntary attributing. No one's making an object they're going to sell out of this. It's just done because it should be done. Somebody feels that way. And if we could kind of get our musical and literary forms going in the same direction, you know, I think that would give us a start to generate a culture that isn't controlled by marketplaces. And I think we really need to do that if we are going to generate a culture that isn't like the one that we're living in. You know, capitalism and is very, very powerful. You know, it's actually, you know, very passively, it's, you know, it conquered Mao, didn't it? Like, there's no Maoism anymore. Like, you know, China's a big business machine. You know, Russia, same deal. It, you know, it will consume whatever it can. You know, this system that we live in, and because of that basis, that it's based on this scarcity and competition and termination and value relationship to what it generates. Because of that, I think it's a great failure as a basis of human society. I don't think it works. You know, there's plenty of evidence of that. I don't think that case needs to be made, you know, as if you can get away with destroying something and you make money off doing that, like, that's rewarded by the system in which we live. And I think that's terrifying and you know, non-productive and toxic, whatever you want to call it. As, anyhow, yeah, I just feel like we should have less attachment to kind of the ego and the selfishness that kind of goes with art. I think that those things pull us back into really what we'd like to overthrow, you know. I mean, it's hard to find, you know, it's hard to find a lot of conservative artists. Like, you know, conservatism's all about maintaining those systems and maintaining competition as a basis for things and making as many terminations within them as possible, because that's what generates value. And yeah, most artists don't want that society and don't really like that. In terms of inclusiveness, you know, when art gets into sort of art stars or pop stars or whatever kind of thing like that, that is such a reaffirmation of elitism, and it's such a reaffirmation of status quo. And even participating on a small scale in that, just kind of continues to pound that message in, I don't think we'll ever get socially what we want as long as we participate socially in those modes. I think it's kind of impossible. So I think that's all we're thinking about in, various ways, like, and, everybody's going to have to figure out their own kind of, solution to this. It's, but we need to, like, if we want an inclusive society that's about these, about this, we have to make opportunities to include in them. A standard product thing is all about that it excludes. That's what makes it valuable, is that it excludes. You can only get this from this. Okay, well, that excludes. That's how it works. That's how it gets its value, I can't think of all the ways to undermine that, but I think that should be like kind of one of our prime directives, if we're thinking about making stuff, is how can we make it not do that? How can we remove this from that system? How can we make this have a different cultural impact, one that doesn't reaffirm the exclusion and the scarcity that tend to just reaffirm what it is we are objecting to,